Kaiser, did you hear back from Ayana as to whether or not she received the link?
Yes, she's good.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the community information session focused on supportive services for student safety, hosted by the Office of Community Engagement. I'm Daphne Kaiser, Assistant Superintendent for School Community Engagement, and your moderator for this event. During tonight's session, we will have Albemarle County Public School division leaders and school practitioners who will discuss strategies and share recommendations that enhance safe and supportive learning environments for grades K through 12. Our goal for this evening is to increase community awareness of school safety initiatives and foster a community-wide dialogue around the various supports provided to students and school communities. Some of the topics that we will discuss this evening include ALICE training, threat assessments, anonymous alerts, school climate, and restorative practices. In addition, participants will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation part of the session. Tonight's agenda includes a welcome from Albemarle County Public Schools Superintendent, Dr. Matthew Haas, an introduction from the moderator of our panelists who will be presenting, as well as panelists who will be participating in the question and answer part of the session. Presentations from our esteemed panelists, question and answer session, and Dr. Irizarry, Director of Equity, School, Family, and Community Relations, will close out our time together with final thoughts and next steps. We appreciate you spending time to be with us. Now we'll turn it over to Dr. Haas for the welcome.
Good evening, Dr. Kaiser, and thank you very much for introducing me. It is just such a pleasure to work with you and to be a part of these programs that I know the Office of Community Engagement spends a lot of time and effort to put together. I'll be brief. First, I want to thank all of our, the panelists that we have here tonight coming out to discuss this important topic after putting in a full day, especially our outside guests that have come. And I want to thank all the participants. It looks like it's getting close to about 50 people, and I'm hoping that number will grow. In the meantime, those of you that have joined us, I greatly appreciate your interest and the time that you're taking to be here this evening. When I started out teaching in 1990, the notion that there was such a thing as school climate was just a beginning conversation. The idea that there was more to school than academics, and perhaps at the secondary level, athletics was a new notion. And over time, we began to understand that climate, the way things are done at a school, the overall feel of the environment, and essentially the psychological and physical safety of the environment for students and staff is a critical ingredient to student learning and building their self-esteem for a future. And so as we discuss tonight, the topics around school climate, school safety, I'm hoping that everyone will think about structure and support and how in Albemarle County Public Schools, we are striving to find a balance between structure, all of the hardware and the routines and standard operating procedures we put in place for safety day to day and in the event of a crisis. And then also the support, the extra personnel, the expertise that they bring to address the social emotional needs of students so that they can be at their best for learning every day. So as we go through the evening, I'm listening for examples of structures and examples of supports. Having said that, I want to thank everyone again for being here, and I'll turn things back over to Dr. Kaiser. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haas. We have a really great group of panelists joining us this evening. Our presenters will share about 15 minutes worth of information related to their diverse roles pertaining to supportive services for student safety. So in a moment, I will introduce the panelists in the order in which they will present. Then the remaining panelists who will be participating in the Q&A. But before I do that, I did want to mention that we do have Spanish interpretation. Ms. Rosara Gonzalez Munez, ACPS Equity Specialist, will be the interpreter. So if that is important or necessary for anyone on the call, please do take advantage of this. We will also be recording this session, and information will be posted on our ACPS YouTube channel. You will have access to this for as long as you need to, and we will be sending it out to our community so that everyone will have an opportunity to watch, even if they were not able to attend tonight. Please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom. We will not answer them until after the presenters have had their 15 minutes to speak. We will take about 30 minutes at the end of the session after our panelists have presented to answer questions. At this time, I would like to introduce our panelists. From the Albemarle County Public Schools Central Office, we have Mr. Ralph Bradley, Director of School Safety and Security, who will focus on Critical Incident Response, or ALICE, and support staff for security and safety. Mr. Kevin Kirst, Executive Director of Student Services, who will focus on threat assessments, school climate, and restorative practices. And Mr. Miles Nelson, Coordinator of Mental Health and Wellness, who will share information on anonymous alerts and mental health supports. From Albemarle County Public Schools, joining us for the Q&A part of the session, we have Mr. Seth Kennard, Principal of Mountain View Elementary School, Mr. Josh Walton, Principal of Walton Middle School, Mr. Dara Bonham, Principal of Albemarle High School, Mr. Ivan Orr, School Safety Coach, Burley Middle School, and Ms. Summer Popolo, Social and Emotional Learning Counselor and Coach for Albemarle High School. All of our work and everything we do in ACPS is centered around our strategic plan, Learning for All. Our vision: learners are engaged in authentic, challenging, and relevant learning experiences, becoming lifelong contributors and leaders in our dynamic and diverse society. Our mission: working together as a team, we will end the predictive value of race, gender, and special capacity for our children's success through high-quality teaching and learning for all. We seek to build relationships with families and communities to ensure that every student succeeds. We will know every student. Our values include equity, excellence, family and community, and wellness. And our goals: thriving students, affirming and empowering communities, and equitable and transformative resources. And although our session tonight touches on all three goals, the primary focus will be around Goal 1 and Goal 2, thriving students and affirming and empowering communities. Now I'm going to turn it over to our presenting panelists, and we will come back in a short while, joined with the rest of our panelists to answer questions afterwards. Mr. Ralph Bradley, Director of School Safety and Security, you are first to present.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Kaiser. I'm here to speak to you today about the portion of our student services that relates to our critical incident response. And so I'd like to talk to you briefly about that. First of all, personal safety is our key priority when it comes to matters where we're dealing with critical incidents. Schools are actually one of the most safest places for our students and staff. But although critical incidents may happen at any time and anywhere, there's a need for us to be prepared and have a plan and process in place in order to make sure that we can mitigate any concerns of challenges or to harm. Part of that is to create a culture of safety and security. So by creating an environment within our district where critical thinking and life skills are cultivated, this will actually aid in making the best decisions when we come to those critical times when we need to make those decisions. So there are times where we have matters where it's just important to pay attention. It's important to understand your surroundings. It's important to Understand when things in your immediate environment change. Change is when things need to be paid attention to and your awareness needs to be kicked into a little bit more of a gear. So it's important for us to make sure that we're taking those first steps of making sure that our personal safety is important and that we're doing those things that are going to keep us safe. Now, in conjunction with our strategic goals, ALICE is the method or system that we've decided to use here within Albemarle County Public Schools, and isn't directly related to the empowerment portion of our goals that have been put forward to us. So the goals of ALICE is pretty much a training that empowers staff through use of choices that they can have to respond to violent incidences that may come about. It's important to understand that we have decisions to make, and it's important for us to be prepared in order to make those decisions. That empowerment also relates to training. It relates to a plan and practice. And remember, we've heard years ago that practice makes perfect. Well, actually, practice makes prepared, and that's the motivation we'd like to address when we address our ALICE methods. ALICE is actually a transition from our lockdown only method, and it presents more of an options-based solution. Lockdown, although it may be an option in some areas, it was found to be one that was limited in its scope and did not provide the options that we find through the ALICE method are going to be more beneficial for our staff and students. So this transition actually was based on prudent information that we got from the Department of Homeland Security, Secret Service, and within the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice. And this has caused us to move away from the lockdown only approach in dealing with violent critical incidents. So as we discussed, ALICE is an acronym, stands for Alert, L for Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. Now, we need to understand that although these attributes are laid out as a potential response mechanism, these are options that are made available to us, and they're not going to necessarily be done in any particular order. So this set of options is necessary for us to employ those critical thinking skills at a point when times may become urgent where we need to respond. ALICE is a common sense approach. It touches your nature as to what is the right thing to do in the situation. Some of us feel that as soon as a problem arises, we need to get out of there and evacuate. Some people feel I need to find a safe place so that I can weather the storm. Either way, whatever your personality, whatever your training is allowed to provide you with options, ALICE provides those options for you. So the alert phase I'd like to talk about first is notification of danger. That can be through your hearing. If you hear a gunshot, if you hear a loud bang, it could also be if you visually see an altercation taking place or an assailant in the building. That alert phase is where you become aware, and it's important for you to address a speedy response that you've been trained upon. Next is going to be the lockdown phase. Now, lockdown is the term because immediately that may be the task that you have to employ as an option. The lockdown also includes when you barricade the room, if you are prepared to evacuate, or if you have to counter through your process. Also, we have the I for inform. And the inform is that key communications process that is going to help us locate the assailant or identify where the threat is within the building or in the area of which we have a concern. That communication is part of, could be cell phone use. It could be receiving calls. One thing that we have implemented within each of the school buildings is that every teacher within the school on their phone within the classroom is able to initiate an ALICE initiation process through a PA system. That is that responsibility, the ability for us to deal with the threat or deal with that assailant immediately and not have to wait for a separate point of identified point to set off the process. But again, we need to make sure that we're dealing with trained and experienced people who have been prepared. The next one is counter. Now, counter, I need you to understand, is not an issue where we're going to attack the attacker. It is actually a response where we're going to create noise. We may create motion. We may create any circumstance that's going to distract the assailant from doing what they're doing, which is going to cause harm. And then eventually, all of our practices, and the foremost of these attributes that we want to make sure we consider and move to as quickly as possible, is evacuation. And that evacuation is at any point during the process, you've assessed the situation, you've communicated, have an understanding about where the threat is. As soon as it's able to be done safely, you would go ahead and evacuate the premises. Get to a place that's a safe location that's previously identified in our plans that have been discussed with each one of our administrators and our staff. And we get to a point where we can reach out to law enforcement and those resources to make sure that we can get help if it has not already been contacted, to make sure it gets on site to our locations. So the ALICE method is a practice that we've put in place that all of our teachers and administrators have been trained on this practice, and we continue to provide updated training, especially to new employees and staff that come on, and continue training just to make sure that we're reinforcing this particular practice. Because again, remember, practice makes us prepared, and that's the principle that we'd like to rely on when it comes to dealing with the circumstances of critical incidences. So we've covered the basics about the ALICE process, and hopefully it has made you guys a little bit more prepared or understand. If you have questions, of course, we'll be able to address those. But as we move forward, this is one of the attributes that requires us to be situationally aware and make sure we're aware of our surroundings and circumstances that are taking place. So if we see something, say something. If you hear something, say something, but always make sure you're paying attention to your surroundings. And there are times where it may not get to the critical incident, but we may find that when you're paying attention to your situational awareness, you may identify circumstances that might potentially become a threat or a circumstance of concern. And I think this is one of those times where you still need to pay attention. And it will also help us to move forward into our next block of instruction, which is going to be related to threat assessment. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll pass it off to the next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley, and we'll hear from Mr. Bradley again during this session. Next up, we have Mr. Kevin Kearse, Executive Director of Student Services.
Thank you, Dr. Kaiser. So let's take a few minutes to talk about threat assessments. And the first is, I'd like to think that one of the elements of threat assessment, we're sort of backward, right, mapping, is to try and make it so that we never have to use ALICE. While we'll always be prepared, threat assessments, the threat assessment process I'm going to walk us through today, just give some overview material, really is put in place to mitigate any potential for violence. So it is a preventive, supportive process that I'm going to talk about today, but I just wanted to sort of give the bridge or the link to even ALICE. So what is threat assessment? This is a process set up to, avoid ever having to have dangerous or violent situations in the school by using a fact-based observable behavior type process to identify, assess, and manage potentially dangerous situations. The reasons why we do threat assessments, really, first and foremost, is it's the right thing to do. We're all committed to having safe schools and keeping our students safe and our communities safe, and it works. There is research and practice that supports the contention that targeted violence can be predictable and preventable. It is a process, and it's a somewhat messy, complex process of data collection, but it does look not just at a perceived threat, but at the subject that made the threat, the target of the threat, the environment, and any data related to the precipitating events. Our threat assessment teams, there is a threat assessment team in every one of our public schools that will do just that, collect data to try and prevent any violent situations. It should also be noted that the threat assessment process is not designed nor meant to be a disciplinary or punitive process. In actuality, it's utilized to identify individuals whose behavior may pose that threat to our schools, and then to assist and provide interventions to interrupt the subject's pathway to violence, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a couple of slides. if we could move on. So the threat assessment process, as I mentioned, is fact-based. It is a systematic process that utilizes observable behaviors, evidence, and facts to identify potentially violent situations in order to address the concern. As mentioned moments ago, we use threat assessments because they work, but we have to be real. Virginia also recognizes their value, and it is required by law that every public school utilize threat assessments and threat assessment teams, and that they develop policy and procedures that are aligned to, or at least are modeled by the policy and procedures developed by the Virginia Department of Criminal Justice Services. So the Department of Criminal Justice Services developed their model policies and procedures and practices based on research from across the country and experts in the field, in addition to the United States Secret Service that did research on school violence, as well as the Federal Bureau of Investigations. So the FBI is also fed into that process. So I want to assure you that Albemarle County Public Schools does have those model policies and practices in place. Each of our schools has a threat assessment team, and we even have in our procedures referral processes, because we realize that the threat assessment team process is also involves the community. So there are times when we have to make referrals to our community service board, Region 10, and other health providers. So we recognize that it is a community effort to do threat assessments well. So not only does the research support the practice of threat assessments in our public schools, but we also recognize that it's not static, right? It's not, oh, threat assessments, they've been done for 9-10 years and it's done the same exact way. No, any technical and sometimes messy, right, a collection of evidence evolves over time. There are best practices that happen and change over time. So things have been tweaked over the years. And I just wanted to let the community know that currently the division is in the process of providing updated training to threat assessment teams in every school in our division. The threat assessment teams do understand what is consistent, before we jump ahead, that their goal is to identify any potential threat and support the identified subject as quickly and as early as possible. That is a key to quality interventions. We also recognize that in order to have an effective threat assessment process, team members need training and the principles and best practices for conducting quality threat assessments. All right, let's go to that graphic. I love this graphic because it breaks down. So I talked a bit about the concepts, goals, but let's dive in a little bit to the functioning of the threat assessment team. Like, so what do they actually do? The threat assessment team process is broken up into 4 distinct parts. Okay, it begins with the identification or identifying even a possibility of a threat, some piece of data or evidence that suggests a person or a location as a target. Now, this can happen through any number of ways. And for example, social media posts shared by students or even their families, word of mouth. We have students that come to staff that they trust and talk and say, I heard something, I saw something, as well as electronic means, even to do so anonymously. We have an application called Anonymous Alerts that Miles Nelson is going to talk about a little later. Once there's an identification of a possible threat, then the inquiry phase starts, where data is gathered and analyzed with experts in law enforcement, instruction, counseling, and school administration. Now, those roles of the threat assessment team are defined in Virginia law, in the Code of Virginia. That's not something we made up. So all those people get together, they look at data, and they start putting things together, much like doing a jigsaw puzzle, right? It's random pieces of information that they're going to use to construct this story. Then they assess what does the story tell us? What is the picture that's developing? And in the context of that identified threat, and then they go into the management phases. What are we going to do about it? The threat assessment team is going to provide intervention and support as needed based on the seriousness, the priority of the attention needed for that threat. And they will continue to follow that until the threat has been minimized or their management is no longer required. Now, this graphical display here is called the pathway to violence, and it is one that isn't just a critical concept for threat assessment teams and for the community to understand. It is actually a tool that we use. As the pieces of data are collected, much like I was mentioning, those puzzle pieces, they do create a data story for the threat assessment team that fits this pathway. And the way this is used is from grievance to ideation and planning. The farther up the pathway the evidence leads us to believe a subject is, the more imminent or dangerous the threat, right? The higher the priority of intervention that is needed. That is how this is used. And we would also be able to scale our intervention and response. So farther along the pathway to violence, the higher the priority to intervene and the support that's needed. The objective of every threat assessment team in any case is to interrupt the pathway to violence for any subject through support and intervention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kurth. Next, we have Mr. Miles Nelson, Coordinator of Mental Health and Wellness.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about anonymous alerts and how anonymous alerts span student safety and student mental health through building a climate of caring within our community. We can link anonymous alerts with our threat assessment process when students or parents report leakage. So this is when we receive multiple reports, kind of like that mosaic that Mr. Kurth was speaking of, about targeted violence through multiple mediums. Or anonymous alerts can be used to report when students notice a friend or a peer going through a mental health challenge. Anonymous alerts can also be used as an anti-bullying measure, which builds upon our practice of peer nominations. And our peer nomination survey is one of our anti-bullying efforts, again, that lets students stand up for one another and seek ways to support those they are seeing struggling. Whereas our peer nomination process is completed once per year as a pulse measure of anti-bullying in our schools, anonymous alerts is something that's available to students year-round. There are multiple options when you go to report anonymous alerts. First, you can submit a post anonymously without any response information given. This is a way to respond to an individual who put in the anonymous alert this way. When anonymous alerts are put in completely anonymous with no contact information, I like to also address that families and students need to be aware that when we get an alert this way, that if we don't have enough information to act upon, we generally have to close those alerts because we have no way to get more information. This makes it very important that when we submit anonymous alerts, that we always remember to supply as much information as we can, such as who, what, when, where, why, to the best of our ability. And I think our middle schools do a great job of this, of teaching this through lessons, because it's intuitive that sometimes it seems like a texting process. And so we say, well, my friend, and we forget to mention someone's name. And so we don't know who we're responding to. And that steps into the next one. So when you are using anonymous alerts, you can also submit an anonymous alert and tag your name, or I'm sorry, tag your phone number or email into it, but it's still anonymous. We still want to know, we still want to have access to that phone number or name, but it does give us the ability to respond to and ask more questions and follow-up questions to that anonymous alert. So if you're asking for help for a friend, we can ask specifically which friend it is. So if you only give us a first name, we could follow up and ask who the last name is so we can make sure that we can identify that student. And then lastly, you are able to submit an anonymous alert where you can provide your name with the alert. You can be transparent and say that you are open to being contacted by an administrator or a counselor to provide more information or come in and ask for support. Again, I just really stress how important it is to make sure that when you submit a anonymous alert, that's comprehensive in its information, that we were able to support students. Just as in writing paper, we always make sure to identify our who, what, when, where, and why. Some things that I like to talk about with the program is that it's continuing to grow. So this is a program that is still fairly new to ACPS. We are now 2 years fully into this program. We had it prior to the past 2 years, but we have really seen its utilization grow in the last 2 years. And with that, in the 22-23 school year, we had 765 alerts submitted to counselors and administrators. And so kind of to compare apples to apples, when we look at the 22-23 school year and the 23-24 school year, if we're looking at the number of alerts submitted from August to November, in the 22-23 school year, we had 225 alerts submitted. This year, from August to November, we've had 391 alerts submitted to the system. So students are continuing to build upon that system, and it's also a system that can be utilized by parents also. So anonymous alerts is an incredibly powerful tool, and it can be used to continually build upon our climate of school safety and how we can continue to support one another. I think the best example I can think of for this system is when I read about a alert that came through where a student was asking for help for a peer that they noticed in class that was struggling. It wasn't a friend, it wasn't someone that they knew well, but they noticed a change in their behavior and they noticed that the student needed help. So they submitted an anonymous alert asking for someone to check in on the student. And I think that's the gold standard of what the system is and how it can help students and parents support each other in creating that culture of safety and support for each other. Next, I'm actually going to pass it back again to Mr. Kirsch to continue to talk about school climate and restorative practices.
Thanks, Miles. Another part of Albemarle County's effort to create a safe and secure school environment is to work on school climate through restorative practices. Now, I do want to point out that the information I share is work in progress, right? It's the ideal that this is, it's transformative over time. But I didn't want to give any semblance that, oh, absolutely every person is doing this. It's not, it's the efforts that we're making. And I want to explain a little bit about why even talk about restorative practices and give sort of a lens into what they are, because they go by many different names. And it's right, not like a copyrighted title with a set number of questions or anything like that. But Albemarle County Public Schools does recognize that some traditional school discipline, while it does work in the short term for schools, it does little with regard to long-term goals for students. That includes teaching kids how to repair harm that was caused by their behavior, right, that they exhibited. That's exactly what restorative practices does. It teaches kids how to be responsible and personally accountable for their behavior. And to be responsible, it means getting their needs met while not interfering with everyone else trying to do the same, right? It's all just everyone getting along. And restorative practices teach both self-awareness and self-control. And I'm going to go a little deeper into what those are. So if we could advance. We've all been part of families and experienced schools and a variety of teachers for a very long time. And we have a wide variety of experiences. And what I really like about this graphic is it neatly displays many of the experiences that we've had, right, in a succinct way. This little table here, and it's called the 5 positions of control. And it also will exhibit for a little bit, give a bit more understanding in terms of what I consider my leadership to be assisting the division to do. So I believe we're continuing the long-standing tradition and effort to move the classroom management and instruction practices toward the right side of this table, whatever possible. So our goal is to move away from punishing and guilting kids, because honestly, we don't want kids to behave in order to avoid pain. That's That's just not our goal. Nor do we want kids to behave because they're doing us a favor, as noted in the buddy role, right? What we really want, our goal, is to squarely practice in the non-judgmental approaches of the monitor role, and ultimately building our skills as practitioners in a division to operate in the manager role whenever possible. And that distinction, right? The monitor role is, hey, here's what happened. Here's what we're going to do with a positive goal in mind. Here's our role. Here's our rule. It's all positive. And then the manager goes a little deeper than that. They're going to go into, what do we believe about ourselves, our classroom, and our school? So again, just a little bit, we're just getting our toes dipped into the water here as I go on to the next slide to try and grasp what are restorative practices. So I'm actually going to do a little foreshadowing for my colleagues that are coming up with some of these pyramids. So I'm giving you a heads up, but I do also want you to know I love pyramids. They're just really classy. So education actually lifted the whole concept and the graphic here from public health, even the concept of how to structure interventions. So that's full disclosure. Thank you, public health community. And here's how they worked. And just to get a concept, because it's really not as foreign as we'd think. There are 3 tiers of intervention in our public health system, right? So for public health, tier 1 represents what all patients would need to get healthy. It starts with just everyone gets education and awareness. Then, you go for your annual exam, right? And if you present with some unhealthy behavior patterns, tier 2 support is given, right? That's typically something to interrupt that negative health behavior, like you're going to need to go on a diet and get some exercise into your regimen. And then we have tier 3. Should disease or illness occur, then you get your intensive treatment designed to stop the disease progression. This actually allows the public health system to triage and address proportionate response to the issues that's presented. We use the same in education. We have pyramids and tiers all over the place. And I'm going to put restorative practices in that context for you right now to get a little bit more of an understanding of how we do restorative practices. So at tier 1, all students are part of our division-wide, school-wide, classroom-wide effort to fulfill our mission of building positive school communities. And within those communities, healthy relationships, strong relationships with our students and our families. But sometimes conflicts occur. We get it. And we need tier 2 services. So they could look like classroom or individual conversations or work in order to address the conflict and hopefully resolve it, right? To get back to the learning and our process. And then there are times that serious behaviors do happen and are manifested in our classrooms and our schools. And that's when restorative conferences may be utilized to repair damage. Now, I throw out restorative conferences and people may say, hey, I want a restorative conference, but that's just a generic title. You may know it by other names, a school-based intervention team meeting, a meeting with the principal. It could be a team meeting. So they go by different names, but just to get a sense of how we try to proportionately address the issues that are presented. So we'll move on to the next slide where we'll go into, so what does it look like and sound like? Talk to me about this process. How would I know what's even happening if it doesn't have the same title? Well, it looks like a respectful gathering, right? So with just a few minutes, I've been studying this stuff for years, and you always just get better at it, right? And deeper, but just a lens in. A restorative circle, a conversation could happen with a student, a small group of students. I've done it with full classes. And then once you're gathered, usually you set some norms, right? Here's how we're going to talk to each other. Here's what we're going to work on. The real work begins, and that's in the questions. We These are not rhetorical questions. They're not questions where the adult or facilitator has the answers. These are real questions that you're asking the folks that are involved in the circle or the discussion. And they sound like, what happened? What were you thinking of at the time this happened? Do you want to fix this? Do you want to make this right? And it's in that process and the resulting plan that is restorative for individuals, groups, and even classes, because they're actually restoring themselves back to who they want to be, because what we believe is all part of the restorative process. But it's also restoring them to their community, right? It's let's get back to class and get learning again. That's the restoration that occurs. Now, some of you may be thinking, that's lovely. That is just wonderful to hear, but that is hard work and it takes a lot of time. And you're 100% right. It does take a lot of time. But I do believe, especially in the age of clicking buttons and apps and such, that the quick and easy, while it may work in the short term, is not always the right thing to do by our kids and our communities and our families. That restorative work is hard work. But when used, whenever possible, because sometimes there is no time to use it, but we could default back to that monitor role that we talked about. But when we do use it whenever possible, it's a good thing for our kids and our communities and our school climate.
Thank you. So just as Mr. Kearse mentioned, the comparison to the public health pyramid, it's similar. It is similar within our schools of staggered supports for students and their mental health. So looking at our list of support staff that support students' mental health, here, tier 1 is where we serve all students and support their mental health by creating an environment where they have a trusted adult within the building as a protective factor. Tier 2 is our smaller subset of our larger student population, and it is more specific in the services being offered. And then again, it gets even smaller with our tier 3 service, which is our smallest subset of students, and is usually a very specialized service for students. We have multiple support positions listed here, such as school counselors, SEL counselors, safety coaches, family support workers, Region 10, Health Connect America, and they flow through many of these tiers. However, I want to highlight that there are also a list of ACPS staff as mental health supports. And I say that because teachers and staff have, for a long time, been our best first responders to student mental health. In Albemarle County, we continue to offer youth mental health first aid training for teachers and staff for anyone that would like to take it. I would also like to note that if any parents are interested in taking youth mental health first aid, we have a great partnership with Region 10, and they offer the course free to community members. Again, we know that teachers are building relationships with students and they feel safe with them. And this is our first line or a tier 1 support for students. This training provides the skills they need to feel comfortable triaging mental health challenges, just as a trained first aider would triage someone who is in need of first aid care. This is not to say that our staff should be mental health practitioners. Just as we wouldn't ask someone who is first aid certified to provide surgery, we wouldn't ask a youth mental health first aider to provide mental health services. However, it does let us practice the necessary skills should a student ever disclose that they are struggling with a mental health challenge and how we can support them. So moving on to the next section, we talk about our tier 2 services, where we start looking at targeted service for students. And this is accomplished by many of the individuals you see here. Go back one slide for me. Such as our school counselors, our SEL coaches, safety coaches. These are all groups of individuals that can work with students and provide supportive services in a targeted structured need and loop in parents to help build a supportive, protective environment for students while they're at school. And then next is our tier 3 service. This is our really specialized service when we talk about things like our partnerships with Region 10 or with Health Connect America, where we can provide outpatient counseling services to students. These are an example, But as we're going through all these services and we're not sure where to start, we're not sure how to help our students, I always suggest starting with the school counselor. That is our case manager within the school and can really help guide that process of how to connect with the right mental health services or right support services for your child and student in the schools. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Bradley to talk about some of the support safety staff in our schools.
Miles, thank you very much. And I would like to move forward and speak with you all about the resource that we've added for security and safety into the schools, which is the school resource officer. Now, as you know, as we move the presentation along, the school resource officers have been working in and within the various school systems throughout the United States, and they have been seen to be in some areas a valuable resource, and others maybe not so much. As we here in ACPS have identified, is that the program was reinstated during this 23-24 school year. And when the program was reinstated, we have an SRO that currently operates under the existing MOU that we have with the Albemarle County Police Department. And the position was established to, the MOU was created to establish the effective roles and responsibilities of the role of the SRO within the schools. So our current SRO that's on board is Officer Jamie Kwasinski. Now that's common spelling, as you guys might understand. And he's completed the SRO program, certification program, and he is also a sworn law enforcement officer within the department, which is two of the foundational requirements of the position. And he is based at Albemarle High School, and he serves the campus there of schools at Lamb Lanes campus as well. Now, just to give an overview of that school resource officer, as I stated, they're sworn law enforcement, and they're responsible for the safety and the crime prevention within the schools. They work closely with each student's administration to implement security measures which are deemed necessary for the safety and of the students and within the staff. And SRO also provides a service to the surrounding community by addressing concerns and can fill a variety of roles, which include preventing and responding to school-based crime, fostering a positive relationship among law enforcement, education, and youth, and helping to promote a positive and safe school climate. And we can stay here on this slide for a moment while I just discuss a few matters. I know we have one of the benefits that has been seen with having SROs within the schools is that it identifies a specific individual who can be assigned to the school, work within the confines of the school, get to know the administration, get to know the student community that is involved, that is within the school and those surrounding schools in which he's responsible for. And it provides a familiar face, and it's created to create a positive relationship between a law enforcement resource and the population of students and staff that's going to be servicing. So the concept of having our SROs within the school are manyfold, but one of which is that hopefully they'll produce a very positive relationship and can respond to matters at the school with the knowledge and forethought of the community that they're in place to serve. So the school resource officer is he's the only one in place at the moment, and we are very happy to have him in place, and hopefully that will prove to be a fruitful relationship that we have with the police department. And now I know we've spoken about a few matters today. We've covered various subjects and topics, and I'm going to go ahead and pass off to Kevin Curtis one more time. And if you can draw this to a nice, wrap it up into a nice bow, Kevin, I think that'll be great. Thank you.
I will do my best. So you did hear a lot of information about different practices, programs, and staff. We believe all our efforts are braided together in an effort to create a secure and safe school environment for all of our students and families. That includes, and is certainly not limited to, anonymous alerts, threat assessments, efforts to address physical safety, restorative practices, and even climate surveys, which we use to progress monitor our efforts in the division. And although we didn't have time to talk about it, peer nominations are on here too, and perhaps that's a topic for the future. But that represents our division's effort to address bullying in a systematic way as well. So what I didn't do well was the turning it over part to people. So I think I turn it back over to Dr. Kaiser.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Kurse, Mr. Bradley, and Mr. Nelson for your presentation this evening. You have been incredibly informative and provided the community with some valuable information. We're going to take about 30 minutes at this time to answer questions from our entire group of panelists. We have a few come in through the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom, and feel free to keep sending those through, and we will answer in the order that we are receiving these. However, do feel free to email to the superintendent's office at k12albemarle.org email address if you feel you have further questions or do not get to an answer due to the lack of time. I do ask that if anyone has questions related to a specific situation, that they touch base with school personnel as opposed to school division personnel and practitioners on this call. And that is probably the best way to get answers to those questions. So now we're going to go on to the first question. And I believe the first question is for you, Mr. Bradley, and it's related to Alice. What is the plan to give training to students?
Currently, we do not have a plan to actively train the students. I know they're aware of the program. Our focus has been predominantly to provide the adequate training and to our administrative staff and our teachers, who are seen as the responsible party within the classroom to identify where to go and make those decisions as to what would be best for that student population.
All right, thank you for that. We have another question around Alice, and this question goes to Principal Kennard. Who decides which response will be used during the crisis? Seems like teachers have the ability to speak over an announcement system. Can you explain what that looks like and who is calling the shots during a crisis?
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. Good evening, everyone. I'm Seth, the principal at Mountain View and also an ALICE instructor for the past 10 years. Your question is really well aligned. The idea is no one's calling the shots, but we are informing what's happening so teachers who are trained can make the most informed decision. So all our staff and teachers and custodians and everyone in the building receiving ALICE training knows they have many options, which includes to safely isolate or lock down, which with this program includes building barricades and keeping yourself really safe, or evacuating away from the danger, which is the preferred response. And based on the information they receive, they figure out what response makes sense for their students. So if you're out at recess with the class and there's information saying there's a threat in the office, it makes sense to go off campus. Whereas if you're closer to the office, it may make more sense to isolate and be safer in a lockdown situation. So there's not one person giving direction. However, all teachers have the ability to use the PA system and our radios to inform real time what's going on, so then they can use those responses they've been trained for whatever makes the most sense for them and for their students.
All right, thank you so much, Principal Kennard. Our next question is around anonymous alerts. And this question is for Principal Walton. What can I, as a parent, do to help support my child or school to be a safe place?
I think the biggest thing you can do actually isn't about anonymous alerts. It's about just speaking with your child on a regular basis and connecting with them and talking with them about what's going on at school. If you do hear something that's of concern, students, parents, anybody really can submit an anonymous alert that's available on the both all of the school websites or all the secondary school websites and the district website. And so parents can submit those. We've received reports from parents, and students can submit them as well. I will echo what Miles said earlier. If you are submitting an anonymous alert, it's really vital that you put in some contact information. The system does use an encryption process to make sure that if you want to remain anonymous, you can remain anonymous, but it does allow us to communicate back with the reporter to gather more information so that we can make sure we investigate it as fully as we are able to do so. But anonymous alerts is a great way to reach out with a concern if you are worried about anything like potential retaliation. Working at a middle school, I often hear about the idea of snitch culture. Nobody wants to be a snitch because they're worried about retaliation. But we always talk, when we talk with students in town halls or just in small groups or individually, we talk about there's a real difference between snitching and reporting. And anonymous alerts is really about reporting for student safety or personal safety to make sure that we can make sure we have safe schools and that everybody feels welcome at school.
All right, Principal Walton, let's stay with you for a moment. You mentioned different ways, or started talking about different ways to support students being safe. What are there other ways that parents can get involved around this?
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly at middle school level, that's when parents start to release a little bit. They want their students to have a little bit more independence, but the bottom line is that kids still want their families involved in their lives. And so simple things like coming out to events at the school, even if it's a Parks and Rec game that your child may not be involved in, but their friends are involved in, being there and being present, I think, is a big part of that. And so supporting them in that way is just being present. But then if you do hear a concern and you don't know what to do as a parent, reaching out to the school, and then we can direct to the right avenue, whether that's a counselor, whether that's working directly with a teacher, if there's a peer conflict going on, working through things like restorative practices and mediation, like Kevin talked about. Those are all avenues that the school can pursue, and there are a lot more than that, but those are some of the things that we've talked about this evening that I think we can help parents to navigate that, because sometimes as a parent you don't know what to do, and so reaching out for help is always okay, and we certainly welcome partnering with parents in that way.
Thank you so much, Principal Walton.
You're welcome.
The next question is for Mr. Nelson. What is the peer nomination process?
Yeah, the peer nomination process is a anti-bullying effort that we started back in about 2014. And it's a process every year where students fill out an anonymous survey, and it has 3 questions on it. 1, do you know someone who's being bullied? Do you know someone who's bullying someone else? And then, is there any students that you think could use help from a counselor? And so that process looks for trends. And as names pop on that list, we have a process in place to where a counselor can talk with a student and see if there is bullying happening and how we can support the student and work through that process. And it's something that happens once every fall. And then I linked that with our anonymous alert system, because that is something where we have continued to use the anonymous alert system to also be able to have a reporting tool that is usable throughout the entire school year.
All right, thank you so much. The next question is for Mr. Orr. What is the role of a safety coach?
Well, thank you for that's a great question. I know I get that quite a bit. not only from our students, but from, families and sometimes our staff members. But really, for me, the way I define what we do as safety coaches is you want to talk about school climate, building climate. I think we are folks who help to set the tone in the building. So we deal with not only the physical safety of the building, but we also deal with the social and emotional safety of our students. And so one of the things that I know a lot of my colleagues are involved in, as well as myself, is being visible and setting that tone when our students come in every day. You can find me in the cafeteria every morning, greeting our students and really just trying to set the way I feel it should follow. I'm calm, so hopefully the rest of our wonderful Bears at Burley will be calm for the most part during the day. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Orr. The next question is for Ms. Popolo. The SEL counselors sound great, but what is their role versus the other staff positions in the pyramid?
We certainly have our own niche that we fill. There are lots of other mental health professionals that we are in contact with, and so we do try and work on issues as a team. There are roles like the school social worker who might really focus more on connecting with families and connecting with needs in the community. Whereas I might fill a role more that is school-based, and that's an important piece. Every social emotional counselor sort of has their own flavor that they bring to the school because every school is different. So if I were to describe, my typical day, that might actually look a little bit different at the elementary level or at the middle school level. And so I can't really talk entirely across the board. And given the size of the school, there might be different resources like the SAP program through Region 10 that might be at one school and not another. So we do try and partner and make sure that students are finding the appropriate resource for what they need. And I hope that answers your question. And I know that can't cover everything.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is for Mr. Nelson. Are SEL social and emotional learning counselors and coaches in all of our ACPS schools?
Yeah, so we are currently having SEL counselors in all of our schools. And like Summer said, the position does vary a bit. However, it is providing a mental health service to support students who are in crisis and or building skills to be able to address academic, so they're able to get the academic content. So really working on working on skills that I just read through all this today. I'm so sorry. The SEL counselors have been structured as in a supportive role. So Summer did a great job of talking about all the different services. So talking about in Albemarle High School specifically, they have the school social worker, you have family support workers, you have the student assistant professionals through Region 10. And so it is a collaborative atmosphere. So the SEL is really building that structure to provide that mental health service to make sure that students are getting the skills that they need to make sure they're able to access the academic content. So it really is making sure that they have the coping skills necessary that they're able to be in class. And so Summer really undersold herself in the skills that she is teaching kids in schools.
All right, thank you, Mr. Nelson. The next question is for Mr. Bradley. What is the plan to expand the SRO program in the future?
Well, actually, we're evaluating the need for that. I know there are some requirements that need to be addressed as it relates to expanding a program like this. There's, of course, there are budgetary matters that we need to consider with the expansion of a program like this. We do want to make sure that whatever services we provide within the district are provided equitably. So we are evaluating the need for additional SROs, but there has not been a decision made as to whether the program it's going to expand at this point. So we are considering, and there are some attributes that we need to review and coordinate with to make sure before we move forward in a direction like that, if we choose to.
All right, thank you for that. The next question goes to Principal Bonham. At what point does the SRO get involved with any matters involving the student?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Kaiser, for that question. So our practice has always been that when we have a potential, say, violation of student conduct or something that happens in the building, that our administrators, who are obviously trained in that situation, are the ones who are doing the investigation. So that information could come from a staff member, it could come from students, anything we need to investigate in terms of any kind of rule violation, or just understand the situation that may be occurring in the building. So we kind of do that independently, like we always have. We talk to students, we talk to parents, we talk to those involved, try to understand what occurred. The point upon which our SRO gets involved is when something ends up being deemed to be a criminal matter. And I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but there is actually legislation and state law that requires that administrators, when anytime there is something that they've come across within their school that is deemed to be a legal potential criminal matter, they are required by law to report that. So that's always been in the case. We didn't have SROs. That was calling non-emergency police and letting them know the situation, because that's our obligation to do so. So with an SRO in the building, what that allows us to do, if we got to that point, we would be having those discussions with the SRO in conjunction, again, with the parents and students and so forth, in terms of moving forward. So it's kind of similar to what it's always been. It just so happens that the SRO here is kind of close in partnership with us. The other thing I think it's a critical factor in this is that when in the past, when we didn't have an SRO on campus, we would have to call non-emergency police to come, and you don't really know who's coming and whether they have worked with youth in the past and potentially have had, again, any kind of partnership with the school. I think having somebody that's with us day in and day out, knowing the schools, knowing how they operate, knowing our values and so forth, actually helps a little bit in terms of that relationship connection with our students and our families as well.
I also wanted to chime in, just having met Officer K, his personality really works with our student population. And I think that that's something that could be, as Principal Bonham just said, it's kind of a roll of the dice if you don't have that. And so it really is a value that he brings to the role and the position, and that kids don't have that automatic reaction that sometimes they might if they just see someone in a uniform, because they get to see him on a regular basis, and it's a little bit more relationship building. So I do see it as a positive.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The next question is possibly for Principal Bonham and Mr. Bradley. What information is being shared with parents and students regarding their interaction with the SROs?
Well, I'll go ahead and start with that. I know the interaction with the SROs is, well, let me backtrack. We did have a question that during the previous presentation that where I referenced the MOU, and the MOU is actually a memorandum of understanding, just to identify that acronym that was used so we have clarity. But the interaction is, we publicize that we have the individual in place. We publicize the roles and responsibilities and what their expectations are within the schools. And I know I'm going to probably defer a little bit to Mr. Bonham as well to discuss specific communication that he might have had within his direct community. Dara, would you be able to just speak to that for the moment?
Yeah, sure. I know that when they came aboard, which was during the summer, Officer Kwasinski, one of the things that we did, and it was like right before we started, I think it was open house. We sent messages out. I send what's like a weekly connect out to my community, just give them updates on things coming up and inform them of who they were. We actually invited Officer Kwasinski and Officer Lilly, who's involved as well, to our open house just to get an opportunity for people to meet the two of them since they were new. We've done some things within the day-to-day operation as well for sometimes they're invited to classes to help speak on certain events or things that maybe are relative to what the students are learning, what the teachers are teaching, and then of course being visible, obviously throughout the course of the day. And while some of that, conversation talks about their involvement when something happens to get criminal, which is part of the requirement that we have. I think the other part that's also important is that they're also a resource for sometimes families will come in and want, instead of them calling not emergency or feeling they got to go to the police station or something, if they have something that's related maybe to their child, or maybe it's just something that they want to connect with the officer in the building, they'll come in and set up appointment or time in which they can connect and be able to kind of discuss through the issues that they have. So it's really a kind of an open source of connecting to the police department as well, and a way that makes it more, I think, visible and transparent, hopefully.
And in addition to that, I know Mr. Bonham mentioned Officer Lilly. Just wanted to let you know that Officer Kwasinski is our assigned SROs to the school. And as we stated, he's assigned to the Lambs Lane community of schools over there with Albemarle High School. Officer Lilly is also a certified law enforcement officer with the county police department. His position is actually funded by the PD. He's not fulfilling a specific role as an SRO within the school district, but he has been trained as an SRO and has the skill set that we're looking for when we're hiring SROs. So he has been put in place to augment any responses to schools where he's available to respond. And in the absence of Officer K, if he's not there, then Officer Lilly can fill in and make sure that we still have that resource available. So we do have someone else who is, I believe, a good quality officer who can function in and within and around our students at our activities. And I think we're happy and lucky to have Officer Lilly as an augmentation to that program. And just to touch on other activities with law enforcement at our schools, you will see officers come to the schools, especially as it relates to athletic events. If we have larger events at schools, we're going to have officers that are handling traffic, and they're there to assist with other security duties as assigned from a community standpoint. So we do have other officers that are involved with our schools, but the ones that are specifically identified to work with our student population directly are Officer K as the assigned SRO and Officer Lilly, who is an augmentee officer with the county police department.
Mr. Bradley, these other additional officers that may attend school community events, do they have the same type of training as the SROs?
Dr. Kaiser, they may not. They are assigned police officers within the department, and they're highly skilled at what they do, but they may not have gone through that same training since they're not assigned to that specific role as a school resource officer. They're functioning in their role as a law enforcement professional to assist with community activities and needs.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The next question will go to Mr. Kirst. What kinds of behaviors and at what developmental levels can you do restorative practices?
So speaking from as an educator, social worker, and parent, restorative practices could begin as soon as a child can understand no. So, right, it's just starting the conversation. Is that safe? So as young as you could ask that question, is that a safe thing to do? You could do restorative practice, right? Because it's all about beliefs. And I've done that with all my kids. So that's at least the developmental question. The what behaviors also runs the gamut. There are some that that different dynamics of restorative practices may not be appropriate, but for the most part, that's the default to look at, right? A fight, from like a serious fight, all the way down to kids have an argument in a classroom, right? Or that was my crayon. No, that's my crayon. Like it runs the full gamut. So that's really my response. It really would be, it's a voluntary process. That's more of an issue, I would say, in my response. If a party did not want to talk and answer questions, like, look, just tell me what my consequence is. I don't want to do this playing and stuff, which some of my kids have said over time. It's just, okay, then here's what we're going to do. So that would be my response. It's your default. And then only when it's not possible or a party does not want to be involved in any restorative work, that you would default back to the monitor role. Well, here's what happened. Here's what we're going to do. Do you think that answers the question?
I think so.
Okay.
I think the next question is for you as well.
Oh.
What do restorative practices look like for students who do not want to engage in the process or do not feel remorseful?
Yes. So similar to what I just said. I have had that experience where it's, do you want to work with, I also work at the alternative school, the Center for Learning and Growth. And by default, we use restorative work. And the first question is, what did you want? What did you do? Did it work for you? Because it didn't work for me. Do you want to fix it? And if it's, no, I don't want to fix it, then it's, okay, then here's what's going to happen. So remember that 5 positions of control? You're always working between monitor, which is, well, here's the rule. Here's what happens when you break the rule. And I am very clear with anyone I work with, any student, if you don't want to participate in the process, which is totally voluntary, what you're doing is saying, you can have my power. You can take control, Mr. Kirst, of the situation and make a decision for me versus me participate. So I actually say that. You want to give me your power? Okay, I'll take it. But that's my response, is I would never force a student to be involved in the restorative process. And if there's no remorse and they don't care, don't want to plan, then I give a consequence in a non-judgmental way. I would say sometimes a consequence looks very much like what a plan could be, because the objective is to keep everyone safe, learning happening, and everyone respecting each other. But yeah, that's what it looks like.
What type of training do staff receive to help support them in implementing restorative practices?
So right now, I would say that it's embedded, right? Much like that tiered approach we have at the elementary level. And I always got to make sure I get it right. Is it responsive classroom? Did I get it right? All right. There's responsive classroom teaching, and right, that's where you're doing that questioning and building community and working through process, issues. And then we're doing developmental design for the secondary folks, but that's at tier 1, right? And then what we're looking to do, and I'm starting this year, is through modeling, and then it'll build out. I've done sessions. We did it during Intervention Institute in the summer, and we will continue to build that. We were also promoting involvement with outside resources. I know there have been some community sessions on restorative practices. So there are things going on, but I am looking to build a more systematic, predictable tier 2 and 3 level of supports. But there are people out there that have already received that training and are accessing it already. So I don't want to say, oh, nobody has. It's like, no, people come with these gifts that are part of their formal training and then professional development. So it's not just me. I'm not the only one-stop shop. There are awesome people that I'm learning from. Wink, wink, Albemarle, wink, wink.
All right, I think this question may be for you, Mr. Kirst and Mr. Nelson. So who decides whether an incident within a school is dealt with punitive, with discipline, or as a mental health crisis with supportive services, including from a trauma-informed approach? Is there any direction from the division on these decisions?
So,
Yeah.
and I think Mr. Bonham, Mr. Walton, and Mr. Kennard could also answer this question too, as they are seeped in this throughout the day. But I'd also like to highlight, like when we offer trainings, we often have principals joining in. When we had our assist training for mental health professionals, which is our applied skills our applied suicide intervention skills training, we had principals jump in on that training also. So knowing when to connect an individual to mental health professionals. And I think it really is a case-by-case basis. Principals are really in tune and also are looking how to train staff and support that trauma-informed approach. And I'll open it up to our principals here on the call too.
I can address this a little bit. This is something I learned from Kevin several years ago, is the word parallel. It's a parallel process. Sometimes it's an and, sometimes there's discipline and support. And usually what happens is that discipline is shorter than the support. The support is much more ongoing to help make sure that type of incident doesn't happen in the future. But sometimes discipline is appropriate, but also mental health support is appropriate as well.
I'm sorry, Dara. I didn't mean to cut you off, man. But I do want to say that as long as I've been working in the division, I've worked with everyone in some capacity in the call in a collaborative way. Like we build relationships. So everyone here has called and said, hey, can I run something past you? Even with Mr. Orr, we've had our sessions like, hey, a case came up, let's talk about it. So I want to give that sense of a spirit of collaboration and movement forward and working together, but respecting principal decisions. But I think that relationship building goes a long way, and that happens regularly in all of our work. We're all still learning. So I apologize, Dara.
No, I was just going to add on the day-to-day basis piece, we have guidelines that the schools have, a behavioral management handbook that looks at, would it be code violations that a student does? Could it be anywhere between skipping a class to, other infractions that may happen within a school setting. We have guidelines that keep that consistency of what we do. And, some of that looks a little consequential in terms of what has to happen. But the reality of that is, those are kind of short-lived in terms of what happens. Really, the most important part is the dialogue and the conversation and figuring out what to do next, right? In some cases, there's potentially some longer standing intervention that must take place to make sure that we're all on the same page, not to repeat those behaviors, and make sure that we're all getting the support necessary to move forward. And sometimes it happens to unveil other things that are happening that perhaps are needed in more intensive supports that we can provide through our counseling team and others in the building. So really, we have a guideline when it comes to maybe infractions, but I think the important part is what's causing the infraction, what do we do to address it? And the reality is, what support does a student need that may be a chance for us to intervene more and provide that for them.
Thank you for that. Mr. Kirst, I'm a bit confused about the differences between the social and emotional learning coach, safety coaches, safety assistants. Can you help clarify those individuals?
I could try. I really think one of the things I'd like to do, and Ralph Bradley and I and Miles, we're sitting down to do just that, is like, let's put a very clear, well, it would be more than a T chart, right? It'd be like an H chart. I don't know what you teachers will call that, but like 3 columns with what are the differences. Now, I work with the student safety coaches. Me and Mr. Orr work together, and we've done just that. Mr. Orr represents professionals that are in our schools to build relationships and really try and look at the at-risk kids. But it's different tools. I would say, like, while they're all helpers, they have a different toolkit, right? So sometimes it's the same. Well, that's a Phillips head and that's a Phillips. Yeah, but the way we use it is different. We have different contexts. While Mr. Orr may not have sessions with a kid, right? An SEL coach might. So that there's, and it's the way the principal uses them. So while I could say I'm not being quite well-spoken in terms of the difference, I would like to put out there, as a result of this, our work to say, here's the difference, here are the different roles, here's how they're used, and here's what makes sense. That is the task at hand. In our effort to try and get people out there, you're right, these titles and people, what they're doing, gets confusing, but they are all helpers with different levels of expertise and different toolkits. And what they all are is probably a session in and of itself. Thank you, Dr. Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Kurtz. We are coming to the end of our time. We have time for one more question. And maybe Mr. Kurtz, Mr. Nelson, do teachers have a way to document to central office if and when they're not feeling safe?
I think this can build in, again, to our anonymous alert system. It's a system that if a teacher wants to submit something, it will go to the administrator at the school, and it also gets connected with central office also, if that is a way to report something also.
And it is a measure of our school climate and our culture, because I have been involved when teachers have said, I don't feel safe around this. Let's get together, whether it's an SBIT or whether it's just a staff meeting. That has happened, but that takes beyond courage. It takes the climate and a support process and a relationship with a principal or authority. Individuals have also gone to people they feel secure with in human resources. They've reached out. So we've tried to make avenues available and supportive, but yes, it has happened and is encouraged. And then, right, the response is, there's a myriad of responses based on what the concern is.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kurtz. So that was our last question for the evening. We have run to the end of our time together. I will place in the chat the email address, both in Spanish and English, that you are encouraged to use to forward any additional questions. Thank you so much again. We've run to the end of our time together this evening. And please put any additional questions, send it to the superintendent's office at k12albemarle.org in the chat box, so we can have those additional questions, and you can request additional information if necessary. Briefly to close, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Irizarry. However, before doing this, I would like to thank all of our panelists for their time, Ayanna Mitchell and Lauren Hunt for fielding questions and monitoring the chat, Dr. Haas and Ms. Smith for attending the event, Kenny Wood for technology support, and Dr. Eric Irizarry, who you will hear from last, managing the slide deck. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we have recorded the session and we will send it out to our entire community. The session will be up on our YouTube channel, so you will have access to it. I cannot encourage you enough to email the superintendent's office at k12albemarle.org email address in the chat. I'm going to put that in the chat one more time. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Irizarry, Director of Equity, School, Family, and Community Relations.
Thank you, Dr. Kaiser. And again, thank you to all of our panelists today. This is our last community information session of the calendar year. So we do wish everyone a safe winter break, and we will be back in January with another community information session. And just one more plug for the folks that are still here. This week is the week of giving and the day of giving. And we have some Donors Choose teacher projects up. So if you want to support our teachers before the break, please check out Donors Choose Albemarle County Public Schools. And again, thank you for everyone being here tonight, and we look forward to seeing you in January.
Thank you all for a fantastic session. Have a great evening.